G'day everyone and welcome to a special presentation from Workplace Health and Safety Queensland, a panel event exploring the use of peer support programs to support mentally healthy workplaces. I'm Chris Bombolas, Media Manager for the Office of Industrial Relations and your host for this morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples watching today. This week is Mental Health Week, celebrated every year in October. Mental Health Week promotes the importance of mental health and well-being and aims to reduce the stigma associated with mental illness. Our theme this year is Take Time. So first up, thank you for taking time today to tune in and show your support for improving mental health outcomes at work. Peer support programs are becoming standard practice as a means of supporting workers of high-risk agencies where exposure to traumatic events is more likely. They provide an early intervention strategy by reducing the stigma and normalising the process of seeking help for employees experiencing mental health issues by connecting them with others who have the skills and experience to support them. There are several benefits to having a peer support program in place, but I'll leave that to the experts to explore that. On that note, I'd like to introduce today's guest presenters. Please join me in welcoming our panellists today. First up, it's Lara Bakes-Denman from Westmoreton Health. Welcome, Lara.
Good morning. Really happy to be here. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. Aaron McCann from Energy Queensland.
Morning, everybody.
Robin Kirby from Queensland Fire and Emergency Services.
Hi, thank you.
And Trish Cabrero from Queensland Police Service.
Good morning, Chris, everyone.
This is what today's program looks like. First, we'll hear from each of our panellists who will explore how their workplace's peer support program works, including how it became to be and how their peer support officers are selected and trained. Following the presentations, our speakers will respond to your questions. After the presentations, you can put in your questions, ask them at any time. All you have to do is go to the chat box, which appears on your screen, put your name in and your question will get to as many as we can. I encourage you to send through your questions, of course, with that chat box. Our first presenter is Lara Bakes-Denman. Lara is the Clinical Initiatives Coordinator in Mental Health and Specialised Services at Westmoreton Health, where she's responsible for coordinating a peer support program that's been in operation since the 90s. This program, which offers psychological first aid to staff who have been exposed to occupational violence or other types of traumatic incidents while on duty, is valued and highly regarded by staff. Welcome, Lara.
Thank you so much, Chris. As Chris just mentioned, our program started in Forensic and Secure Services back in the 1990s. It was a component of a 3-year multifaceted approach to prevent occupational violence and to support staff who had been physically assaulted by patients. The program aligns with Westmoreton Health's strategic plan and Mental Health and Specialised Services operational plan. It sits under Westmoreton Health's Heads Up campaign. This campaign focuses on maintaining a culture where staff feel valued and their wellbeing is supported. Our PSP program is only available to mental health and specialised services staff, and over the last 2 years we've expanded this service into our prison health services and our community acute services. Our providers are recruited annually, and we ask that they have 2 years of current mental health experience, that they have a clinical background, they have an understanding of trauma and its impacts, and they're recruited via an expression of interest, and that this needs to be supported by both their line manager and the director of that service area. Most of our providers come from a nursing or allied health background. Many decided to join the program as a volunteer because they themselves had been recipients of the program, and approximately 50 providers are on our team at the moment. So with the orientation of our staff, we bring them together with myself and our other coordinator in the community acute services, Zonia Weidman, and we talk to them about the operational aspects of the program. We also teach them how to provide psychological first aid and how to also incorporate the use of trauma-informed care. They're also provided with a suite of resources, which include psychoeducational material for staff and their loved ones to support them at home, promotional material, role descriptions, program activity reports, and a scale that can be used as well with staff to look at what their symptoms are, not to diagnose, but just to psychoeducate about those. We hold monthly meetings to support staff and ongoing training for them as well. We use the Teams app, which many of you are probably very familiar with, for ongoing communication. Staff can refer themselves to our program or their line manager or the most senior person on staff at the time an incident occurs. This is just a brief snapshot of who we work with, and I highlight that we work with both people who have been directly or indirectly affected by occupational violence or trauma in the workplace. This has got a very strong evidence base, not just focusing on those that have been directly affected. We also support staff that may have had a near miss as well or witnessed the event. We don't do performance management or treat and manage people with mental illness, for example, or do comprehensive mental health assessments. In regards to the other services available to support staff if they're in a crisis, we will utilise our employment assistance program, as all our volunteers on our program as providers are frontline clinicians. Recipients are able to access up to 3 sessions from work or home, face-to-face, via phone or email, or even the Teams app we're trialling. And the sessions are free, they're confidential, and there's no record kept on their HR. So thanks very much, Chris.
All right, we will catch up with you, Lara, during the Q&A session. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions for Lara about West Moreton Health's peer support program, send them through using the chat box on your screen. Our next speaker is Aaron McCann, a mental health advocate for Energy Queensland, supporting the work they have undertaken to protect the mental health of their employees through their peer support program. Aaron has lived experience with suicide and is suicide first aid qualified, a trainer with Mates and Living Works programs, a current psychology student and a member of the Australian Psychological Society. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Chris. So our program has been in place since 2017, and that's a peer support program that's got its focus in suicide prevention. One of the major catalysts for that was that we had a 2-year period a little while ago in which we lost 7 of our employees to suicide, and that put us at a vastly higher rate than the general population. At that stage, our business started to look around at what other people were doing to affect that, and they saw the great work that Mates in Construction was doing within the construction industry. We partnered with Mates Construction and the ETU to launch Mates in Energy. Mates in Energy is a 3-tier process, the first of which is what's called general awareness, which is essentially education to the entire business that the peer support network exists. It does a number of things as well in that it I guess, gives us common language between our peer supporters and everyone else within the business. From that, we also get volunteers who would like to go on and do more and become those peer supporters. And so they put their hand up and they step into what we call connector training. Connector training is 4 hours worth of training in how to be a pathway to help and how to ask someone what can be a really confronting question, which is asking directly about suicide. From that as well, we ask for more volunteers who would like to go on and do a little bit more, and those who would like to do so go on to do 2 days worth of training in applied suicide intervention skills training, essentially how to take someone with a death plan and work with them until they become someone with a life plan. Both of these training programs are developed off the Living Works suite of programs, which has been leading the world in suicide prevention for about the last 30 years. We have about 120 connectors within our program, so that puts us a ratio of about 1 to 6. We have about 7,500 employees across the state at 79 locations, and we have those connectors at every location and at every hierarchical level throughout the business as well, from executive leaders to first-year apprentices. Of those 1,200, 120 have gone on to do applied suicide intervention skills training, that 2 days worth of training in that suicide first aid. One of the ways we keep the connectivity between our peer supporters is that we have ongoing connector meetings, we have refreshers, we have newsletters. But really what we do is we facilitate them to drive that connection in the way that's going to be most applicable to them in their area. Look, the program that we do is very much targeted around skills to help someone in a suicide crisis, but has flow-on effects to many other domains as well. And they're supported by other peer support programs. We have mental health first aiders, sexual harassment and discrimination officers, and domestic violence officers as well, very targeted in their skills there. And look, all that's also scaffolded by the wonderful MATES case workers, by the other field officers for MATES, for myself and the other mental health advocate, James Hill, and of course our EAP. And I look forward to answering any questions about our programs coming up. Thanks, Chris.
I have no doubt, Aaron, there'll be a few for you, so stand by. Our third speaker this morning is Robyn Kirby from QFES. Robyn is a psychologist with more than 25 years' experience working with peer support programs across various government departments and community agencies. For the past 9 years, though, Robyn has worked for Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, managing their peer support program, including driving the implementation of organisational initiatives, as well as in-the-field experiences of leading support teams during Queensland's major disasters during this time. And we've certainly had a few. Take it away, Robyn.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm very proud to be here today to talk about the peer support program for the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. My role for the past 9 years has been focused on developing the peer support program for the staff and volunteers of QFES. We have an incredibly dedicated network of peer support officers who are more commonly known as PSOs that I feel very privileged to work with, and I hope that our discussions today help to highlight the value of peer support. The psychological support services were initially established in 1992 following the clinical evidence of Dr. Beverly Raphael at that time, which highlighted the mental health risks of the emergency services populations. Peer support programs were soon included as part of the broader range of support services for what was then the 3 independent services of the Queensland Fire and Rescue Service, the Rural Fire Service Queensland, and the Queensland State Emergency Service. In 2014, these services integrated to become the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, and these are more often referred to as QFES. The QFES peer support programs support the whole QFES workforce, including volunteers and staff from all services, capabilities and corporate divisions. There's an estimated total of around 47,000 personnel. Peer support is based upon one of the great Australian traditions of looking out for your mates. And there's a strong culture among emergency services workers to help others. So often, peer support happens quite naturally and informally. Over the past 27 years, the QFES PSOs have strived to build a strong reputation. Whilst they have a diverse background and range across a broad spectrum of the ranks and roles within QFES, they have a common desire to help their colleagues. As most people would be aware, due to the nature of their role, frontline emergency service personnel are often exposed to an accumulation of critical incidents or potentially traumatic events over the course of their career. Therefore, PSOs are well positioned to notice any changes in their colleagues' behaviour and can proactively extend a helping hand or point people in the direction of professional counselling if that might be needed. The QFES PSO role is voluntary and embedded into the operational framework to support colleagues who've been involved with critical incidents or disaster events. People will seek support though for a broad range of reasons, and PSOs will frequently assist with personal concerns as well as work-related issues. The QFES PSOs are proactive in delivering education presentations or providing resources to inform colleagues of the support services that are available to them. They'll often participate in events or initiatives that raise awareness about mental health, such as Are You OK Day, Movember and Mental Health Week, which creates opportunities for people to openly talk about their experience. QFES presently hosts 160 active PSOs across Queensland who are supported locally by their Regional Supervision Counsellor and the PSO Coordinator. QFES has a rigorous selection process to ensure credibility of the PSO role. The applicant must be an active QFES member with at least 2 years of experience. The online application process includes endorsement from an experienced PSO and confidential feedback from 2 colleagues and their direct supervisor. The applicant participates in an interview with their local supervision counsellor to review their suitability for the role, and they require ethical screening and endorsement from their regional managers to be invited along to the PSO Foundation training and assessment course. The initial training for the PSO role involves a 5.5-day residential workshop with continual observation and assessment throughout the course. The training is highly experiential with a focus on using group process to enhance strong communication skills and reflective practice. The training and topics include things such as psychological first aid, suicide awareness, grief and loss, relationships, recognising signs of mental health conditions, group dynamics, as well as self-care. Following the induction training, the probationary PSO is provided with a minimum of 6 months mentoring support within their region, and their competency is reviewed by the supervision counsellor before they're being endorsed as an active PSO. Peer support programs must have a strong framework of support around them to assist the PSOs in performing their role and applying boundaries when needed. This is really essential to sustain the longevity of a PSO program. The QFES PSOs are required to participate in a regular supervision meeting with their psychologist. We host annual skills development workshops in each region to allow PSOs the opportunity to refresh their knowledge and skills, and they are regularly provided with resources and online training opportunities that might be of interest in their role. And each year, QFES recognises the PSO's valuable contribution by celebrating Peer Support Week. This event includes activities that raise the profile of the PSO role and has included the Queensland Police Service and the Queensland Ambulance Service in a combined emergency services challenges to create an interactive and fun shared experience across agencies. We would love to see other organisations involved with the Peer Support Week initiative. To be able to work within their role, the PSOs need a sound knowledge of some other referral options. So some of the additional services within QFES include a network of around 140 external professional counsellors across the state, the QFES chaplains who provide practical, emotional and spiritual support for the QFES personnel and their family, and the support services for QFES leaders, as well as other units that are involved in supporting personnel such as the health and safety and the injury management team, among others. As the FESN website also hosts a wide range of information and resources for referral purposes. So that's an introduction to the program for QFES. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Robin. I love the idea of mates helping mates, particularly when these issues can be very emotive. Our final speaker this morning is Trish Carrero. Trish is a senior psychologist for the Queensland Police Service, where she's worked for the last 12 years. One of her many responsibilities at QPS is coordinating the Peer Support Officer network for her area. She has a special interest in peer support within frontline emergency service organisations and has witnessed how it can be used within a psychological first aid critical incident context. The floor is yours, Trish.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. How our PSO support network originated was generally it was a welfare section that comprised of district welfare officers, which were the precursor for the current system of senior psychs and social workers. These were mostly police officers who expressed an interest in the care and concern for their colleagues but weren't necessarily trained mental health professionals. As a result of the Fitzgerald Report in 1989, it identified a need for police to access professional and confidential counselling, and from this the Internal Employee Assistance Unit was established, comprising of psychologists, social workers and senior psychologists. Our first PSO training was held almost 30 years ago in South East and Metro South regions after it was identified that a more formalised and structured approach to critical incident follow-up was required. Our PSO policy was later ratified by the Board of Management in August 1994, and the standardisation, nomination process, training, the renewal process for reaccreditation was adopted in 2003. If we look at our definition of what a peer support officer is, they're both sworn and unsworn members, which means that they're both police and civilian staff of the service who volunteer their time to assist and support colleagues who might be experiencing personal and work-related difficulties. By the very nature of being a peer, they're uniquely placed to readily understand the culture and challenges of frontline emergency services. They're identifiable as credible avenues of support who can listen empathically and offer different perspectives to an issue that might reduce stigma around help-seeking behaviour. Referring to the model of PSO program, it sits within the employee assistance and employee wellbeing units. We have over 700 PSOs across the state. Special shout out to Capricornia District and who are listening in today. And these PSOs are managed by about 28 senior psychs and senior social workers. And we cover that support to almost 15,000 staff. As stated, PSOs are made mostly up with police officers, but we do have civilian staff, so we need to provide that support across our staff members. And it also expands to regional areas, including commands as well. So each have their own unique challenges and needs. We have to be flexible to match these differences, such as considering rural and remote policing. All our PSO officers are trained in psych first aid, and whilst they aren't counsellors, they're often the first point of call on that contact after a critical incident, and then they can provide information and referrals about the various support options. We rely on our PSOs quite readily. They operate under a code of ethics which ensures that there's integrity and confidence in the program. In terms of selection, there are a number of steps that we go through. Many are already doing the role informally and may be approached by one of our senior psychologists or senior social workers, another PSO or their supervisor to consider doing the role. Otherwise, we have an expression of interest that might be sent out advertising the course. Deciding whether to be a PSO is a serious undertaking, as there's some responsibilities to the role that might impact on their substantive role. So, and organisation and operational constraints, such as attending ongoing training, being asked to provide some statistical data, or some input on some wellbeing initiatives that they may not have even considered. They're then asked to complete a written application outlining the reasons why they wish to be a PSO, and then identifying any particular skills they hold that might be useful in the role and providing examples where they've supported others in the past, demonstrating that they have a genuine care and concern for looking out for their colleagues. Applicants are considered and how well they match these qualities of a PSO, as well as where are the areas of need, because we want to provide any or fill any gaps in ranks, station, units and so forth, so that we're providing coverage of various ranks in policing as well as administrative and civilian staff. Applications are assessed for suitability in accordance with the PSO Code of Ethics, and shortlisted applicants are interviewed before being offered a place on the foundation course. The foundation course, which is the initial training, is a 4-day training program. It covers modules such as ethics, psychological first aid, active listening, support and referral options, as well as PSO self-care, which is imperative to remind them that it's important to look after themselves as well in that role. They need to attend 6 hours worth of training and 1 to 2 hours worth of supervision annually with their internal psychologist or social worker to remain accredited. And there's a number of different options that this can be conducted by. Face-to-face, Microsoft Teams, email, and training through videos, etc. Additionally, we have annual self-care days for PSOs and the PSO week, as Rob mentioned. And these are organised to provide recognition and validation for the support provided by PSOs, both seen and unseen, to their colleagues, which benefit the organisation. Our Peer Support Week is an annual event and it's held in the first full week in March, and I do encourage other organisations to get on board with this initiative, and as it's a small way for the organisation to recognise and validate the wonderful work that PSOs do in support of their colleagues. There are often station morning teas, service-wide communications, and acknowledging the important work that they do, especially from our senior officers. It's an important way to promote the service that's available to other staff, as well as an avenue for recruitment. As the PSOs sit within the Employee Wellbeing Unit, they're coordinated by the internal social workers, psychologists within each of those district regional commands. So in that way, some of those things might be done differently. They're upskilled and they're knowledgeable about the available internal and external support systems, which we've briefly got up here, including our chaplaincies. The chaplains are really important. We've got injury management, alcohol drug unit, employee relations and the union, so that there's a number of different referral options available. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Trish, and thank you to all 4 of our presenters for giving us an insight into their programs. I'm sure all 4 of you will agree we've come a long way from the old days where we used to go down to the pub and let off a bit of steam, and that was the way with dealing things. So some great initiatives, and I look forward to hearing a few more initiatives that you guys can offer up to us. And we do have a number of questions, so let's go to those. If you do have one, remember, join us via the chat box, give us your name and your question, and if you have a particular person you'd like it directed to, then we'll direct it to that person. Otherwise, we'll open it up for general discussion to the panel. We do have 4 wise members on a panel, so you're all welcome to put in some comment. First up, let's go to Daniel, and Daniel asks, what have been the challenges in delivering a peer support program? So who wants to lead off?
I can start by saying that I think with recruitment, it can be quite challenging. The way the evidence was says to do is to actually be doing these comprehensive interviews and, what my colleagues are doing, but sometimes it's just not possible to allocate that amount of resources to do that recruitment. So we rely upon others to help us screen. So I think that's a core component, is the recruitment, and also getting your executive sponsorship is really super important because there's a lot of work in setting up the program and then sustaining it. But with their sponsorship, it makes it so much easier.
Yeah. I agree. And I think there are certainly some challenges that are quite universal across peer support programs as well. I think accurately capturing data that reflects the support that peer supporters do, as well as the value that that program offers for an organisation, I think is something that sort of happens across most organisations as well. I think specifically for QFES, one of the main challenges that we have experienced, certainly this year, given the disaster support that's been required over the last sort of season, the capacity for peer support was stretched to its limit. So we are really keen to look forward to developing and expanding the numbers of the peer support program, and unfortunately with COVID this year, that's kind of restricted our capacity to be able to do some more training. So
okay, well, let's talk on that issue quickly, and you might jump in as well, that in times of crisis, when we have natural disasters and things like that, or from a QPS point of view, when resources are stretched, how do you then, because that's when probably you need this peer support program because you are engaged, your people are out on the front line, and this is the time when you really need people to step up to the plate. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, we find, in terms of disasters, they've got a task, and that's actually a protective mechanism. So they know what they're doing, they step in. It's only maybe when they have that time to reflect. And by the very nature of it's collegial, then they might be able to say, that was a pretty ordinary job, or, this is the stuff that might be impacting. So, but it really depends on the trust and the credibility of the peer support worker. And some of the challenges that might be involved is that, you may not have a PSO on shift at that time. So shift work is incredibly challenging, but in terms of the PSOs, if they know about something, they might follow up. And one of the things that I'm really proud of what they do is that the colleagues don't even know that the PSOs are actually PSOing them. They're very stealthy.
Well, they've got to be able to connect, haven't they?
Definitely.
Because if you cannot connect, you're not going to have any breakthrough at all.
We're involved a lot in, hurricane response and those sort of things, mass mobilisations of staff, and I guess what we do is at sort of morning musters, at inductions when we get to the new area, one thing we do is make quite clear who the peer supporters are and sort of get them to make it known, just remind everyone that they're there and they exist.
That's a little bit different to that approach where
Yeah.
they're doing PSOing via stealth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your approach works as well. So we can look at variable approaches. What works best for you? Is it one that you should adopt?
And I think that's the most important thing. I think for any peer support program is making sure that it's applicable to what your group does, right? Like it's because there are a whole range of ways where it can work. It's what works for you that's going to make it the most successful program.
Aaron, you've got the floor at the moment, so why don't we go to a question for you? And it is, were there challenges introducing the MATES model to a new industry? And if so, what are they?
I guess the biggest challenge, and it's not only to a new industry, but probably to a new business overall, is that you've got to have that executive level buy-in at the end of the day, because it's the business that's going to be facilitating allowing it to happen. So we were quite lucky in that we did have that executive level buy-in, but if we were in a spot where we didn't, that for me is where that really advocating to those executives, those leaders, that the benefits. We're lucky in a peer support space that there's a whole wealth of evidence that they work, and in a fantastic way. There's a whole lot of businesses who have really established successful peer support networks. So I'd say if you are having challenges doing that, reach out to some people who have already making it happen, and yeah.
And while you're on camera, I'm going to get a point to this one. It's Trade Mutt. We had a session with the Trade Mutt boys, so a shout out to Matt and Dan. And you're wearing the gear, and you might want to just remind people what Trade Mutt's all about, and offer them a bit of a plug.
Absolutely. So yeah, Trade Mutt are a fantastic organisation. So they make pretty chilled out shirts that blend in with the environment, and it's all about bringing awareness to something that we've sort of hidden away. You might be able to ignore your feelings, but you definitely can't ignore a shirt like this. These are about being a conversation starter, engaging those conversations. Especially, I work in a male-dominated trade workforce, right, where we haven't always had those conversations in the past. And yeah, can't recommend enough. Check him out. The fantastic work they do. Yeah, they're doing a great job.
Yeah, maybe we could get a range of after workwear for the emergency services and QPS, similar along those lines.
That'd be interesting.
That would be good to see.
Let's go to another question. Let's bring it back to a serious conversation. For Robin and Trish, are there PSOs full time, or is it time limited?
That's an interesting one. In terms of, we have flexible workplace, so we have people that are part-time, people who are full-time in their substantive role. But the PSO role is, I guess it's ongoing. But if people, the PSOs themselves, find that they want to just tap out for a brief time, they can do that and then come back in when they're ready. So I'm not quite sure I fully understood the question.
I wondered that too as well, Trish. I wonder whether the question is actually asking about do we have people that are dedicated as peer support officers? So I guess my answer to that would be that for QFES, the PSO role is voluntary, and it is something that somebody does in addition to their usual operational or administrational managerial kind of role.
37.5 hours or
That's
whatever
right.
they work.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
above and beyond their duty.
Yeah, so they're not sort of dedicated for full-time peer support work. It is something that they do in addition to their usual role. And often that happens quite informally, but within QFES as well, we have such a huge number of volunteers. PSOs are one of the groups of volunteers that work within QFES. So, yeah.
Question for Lara this time. Do you use wellbeing or psychological screening in the PSO recruitment process? And if so, what do you use?
We don't use any tools or anything like that in our screening. The reason why we have the 2 years of current mental health experience and a clinical background is based on the assumption that you'll come with a skill set that will include micro and macro counselling skills, those empathic abilities to be able to listen, know how to manage duty of care. You've been around long enough to really understand what that is, and that's what we're drawing upon in our training to complement with psychological first aid. So we don't do anything in particular, but we do rely upon that background to come in. There's no screening tools like that we use.
Let me give you a question without notice that you can all chip in here. How do you measure that it's working? How do you know it's effective? Like, you can offer all the services you like. Is it merely by the numbers that are using it? How do you judge that your peer support program is actually making a difference?
I can start.
All right.
So we're very fortunate. We have a service evaluation and research unit, and they work with myself and the team to conduct formal evaluations. We have feedback mechanisms. We also draw upon the health services policies around compliments and complaints as well. So, yeah, and we've recently done a research project looking at the perspective of the recipients and the providers. So we have some fairly structured approaches to our evaluation.
Yep.
And also, as Robin was mentioning about collecting the data, that is something that we do, and that is another way that we look at the evaluation of success, is the level of acceptance rates. And we see them go up and down, and more recently they've been going up. So I do a quarterly report based on the program activity data that goes to our executive for substantiation.
A lot of analytics go into that. Can you add to that?
Yeah, so we do some formal evaluation, so that whether that be surveys whilst they're doing training at refreshers, that sort of stuff. We also do a bi-yearly mental health survey throughout the business to really find out everyone's thoughts, not just those who are involved within the program as well. But we do a lot of informal, asking a whole lot of questions, going out, touching base with teams, finding out if it's working, what we can do to improve it. Yeah.
Cool. You guys?
Absolutely agree. I think feedback's really essential to make sure that you're continually meeting the evolving needs because they do change over time as well. So making sure that you've got some processes in place that actually gather that feedback is really essential, I think, for the sustainability of the program over the longer term. And within QFES we do that, we have a very strong focus on continuous improvement, so there's lots of invitation for feedback from people who've used services, but we also have an annual internal review, as well as on occasion an external agency will do a formal audit of the program at times as well. And I think one of the important things that we kind of really try and incorporate into the service though is very much like making sure that it's continually meeting people's needs, and that I think is really essential to build the reputation of the program over the longer term. So,
what about Trish from QPS?
It's been formally audited a few times in the last several years, and the majority of the responses we get back is that the organisation's really quite happy with it. And I think that the reason why it does work so successfully is that it reduces that stigma around mental health. So it makes it very normalised in terms of, we're just having a chat. It might be either in the car or over coffee. So as I said, it's really important, and that the utilisation rates are really quite high. But you won't necessarily hear about a lot of the good work that they do because it goes behind the scenes.
Well, after your earlier confession from your two point of view, your two agencies, QFES and QPS, about the doing it by stealth, I hope you haven't given away too many trade secrets now that you're in trouble. Michael joins us. Thank you, Michael, for your question. And Michael says, what's the difference between peer support and EAP and other mental health support initiatives in industry such as Mates in Construction or Mates in Energy?
Yeah, right.
Aaron.
I can start that one. I guess one of the primary differences is that a peer support person is someone who they're alongside you. I guess they understand the day-to-day, what it's like to be in your role, and quite often they are that stepping stone to more professional help should someone need it. But I guess the primary difference is, they have a limited amount of training in how to be that pathway, how to be that supporter in our context, right? But look, they aren't a counsellor. They're someone who can point you in the right direction, and they're there because they care, you know what I mean? And just having someone who cares makes a massive difference.
Well, they work in your industry or alongside of you in the trenches with you, and they're a mate in most instances, and they simply are a conduit to perhaps professional advice or further advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say I agree with that collegial relationship
Yes.
is really important. And also because they have the contextual understanding of where that person works. So they're not having to unpack to somebody who may be completely unfamiliar with it in the employment assistance program. They'll have amazing skills, but they won't get that context. So there's no need to download, the context of the patients and the secure setting or those sorts of things. And that makes a huge difference.
All right, let's go to another question. Josh W. What do you think are the most important characteristics and qualities of the most successful peers in PSP or PSOs? You're all chuckling over this side, so you can start off, Trish. Yeah.
They've got to be empathic. They've really got to have that genuine care for their colleagues, but also the confidentiality of the service is imperative, because nobody's going to want to talk to someone who don't have that confidence or in that person that they're speaking to. So we are after those people who probably already trying to do that. So I think they make the best peer support officers.
Absolutely. Having really good listening skills, I think, is essential. And being able to kind of establish that trust and rapport in a relationship is really important.
That was the word I was going to say, is trust, a huge part of that. Well, you two are blowing your chances, because you said it's being done by stealth in your organisation, so you're out. Over this side?
I would add to that by saying their credibility, how they're seen professionally in the organisation is an important consideration.
Yeah, so people may look up to these.
or
they may not necessarily be a higher ranking person, but they may look up to them.
That's it, and they've seen their very empathic nature. They're a leader. Let's go and have a cup of coffee. It's not, like a robotic engagement.
Aaron?
The credibility.
Like I think we all have peer supports where it's driven initially by volunteering. And I think that's a big part. Like we said, most of them are already doing it. We're helping them hone those skills. I think the thing that makes them most successful is that they want to do it. We're just giving them the ability to be able to do so effectively.
On that note, have any of you ever seen somebody who's been doing it, didn't actually realise they were doing it, and then you could offer them a role and say, why don't you take this up formally? You know what I mean? Like they've been doing an outstanding job and they've been encouraging and supporting their peers, and all of a sudden you go, well, why don't you take this on?
Absolutely. Often a lot of people are drawn to do the role because they are doing it already quite informally and naturally themselves anyway, which is great. And I think one of the things I hear lots of people talk about, like the reason why they become peer support officers, is because they went through a really challenging time and they got support from a PSO, and that then inspired them to go on and do the training and to give back in that capacity as well. So it kind of has got a lot of power behind it, building that momentum and being able to influence people more broadly. And I think that's one of the real benefits of having a peer support program.
One of the things with peer support, and one of the highlights, and Rob and I talk about this, is that peer support's not only just for people who are upskilled in that area, it's across the whole organisation. So our leaders, looking after the people that they're supervising. So peer support is across the board, and it's not just up to a few individual people to do that. So that's one of the things we wanted to highlight.
Caitlin, thanks for joining us. Her question today is, how do you measure or gauge the uptake in peer support services? And do you get to a point where you think, oh, we've got a bit of a crisis on our hands here, there's a lot of people reaching out for that service? Lara, you can open the batting.
Looking to me,
you look like a good opening.
I'm ready to go. Gauging the measure of uptake. I mean, like I was saying before, we do collect the program activity data, and our team sort of has regular contact with each other, and the executive may highlight, are you aware that this incident has occurred here and there? So if I haven't heard from anyone, I'll actually get in contact with a supervisor or coordinator in that role and say, has anyone responded, been in contact?
So be proactive in that space?
But 100% of the time, yes, our team's already been in and involved. Just the paperwork or phone call hasn't come to me. So it's really important to be proactive, and one of the challenges in that space is you might get everyone on shift referred, and there may be up to 12 people and only 1 or 2 responders on deck to respond. So that's something we're exploring at the moment. But the level of acceptance is also something we measure, that if people are accepting our program, that means that there's been a good connection, it's valued, it's welcomed. So I'll hand over perhaps to Aaron.
So look, we don't capture any data around
Yep.
activation of our peer supporters, but we are able to, I guess, find out if there has been maybe a significant incident that slid under the covers. Might not have been work-related. Rural groups is somewhere, something might happen in the community that actually affects a whole lot of people. What we do find is that our peer supporters, though, generally will reach out to myself or my colleague James or someone in our team to do a debrief, let us know, hey, look, this is going on, and so then we can activate a bit more targeted response to look after the people going through that.
And that's an interesting point you bring up, particularly in rural and remote areas. Things can slip through the cracks and can have a huge bearing or effect on a community. And your people are members of that community. So, you know, it may not be a direct effect on them, but it has a ripple effect through that community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the strategies to kind of help manage that as well is to kind of have a very diverse and dispersed group. So with us, it's really important to try and get as much coverage as possible, so that we do have peer supporters who are available for areas that, you know, maybe a little further afield.
And that's an important one for you, Trish, because you have people stationed in very remote areas and may often be very tiny communities, and a lot of them dotted across a large area with only a handful of staff. So
PSOs will get utilised and sometimes overutilised. So, and that's why it's really important to have, you know, it's not just one person's responsibility. It has to be dispersed across the board. But the work that they do, and as I said, we have over 700. So you would think 700 PSOs, there'd be plenty, but no. And it's really a good thing to have, and it's one of the things I'm really most proud of is the work that they do.
Just quietly, what's the approximate size of the staff, the QPS staff?
Be close to 15,000.
15,000,
statewide.
and you've got 700. So yeah, they've got a spread.
There is a
large
big
number.
spread.
Yeah. This is a question from Rosie, and we'll start at your end this time, Trish. For all the panel members, so we can all chip in here. How is a request for support activated and then consequently how is a responder allocated?
So part of the information that we get is we might get notified that something's happened, and that's in terms of the critical incident sort of activation. The PSOs themselves actually initiate or self-initiate a lot of those times because they know what's going on and what's happening on the ground. In terms of how PSOs actually allocated, it depends on what station, whether or not they know the people. But if it's for, say, something aside from a critical incident, we have lists that people can actually go and approach. So it might be somebody they've worked with, it may not be in that station. So there's a couple of different ways in which they might get activated or involved.
You're similar?
Yeah, similar, and because I guess there's a number of different streams for how people kind of access peer support. So if it is in relation to a critical incident, we have an embedded kind of framework of support to follow up with people who are involved with those types of events. But most of the peer support just happens quite informally and naturally. So a PSO might notice that there's some changes going on for somebody, that they're a bit out of character. So they'll just sort of approach them and start up a conversation and do that kind of informal support in that way. But then if somebody is looking for a peer supporter, then we also have the PSO contact details available via our website. So somebody can get online and have a look and see who's around the area, if it's somebody that they know or feel comfortable with, and then they'll initiate that for themselves as well. So most of the time it's not formal. The only time we really have a formal structure around that is when it is in a response for a critical incident.
Here's a question from a rank amateur who knows nothing much about this, but it would be about who you feel would best connect with them or who has ties with that person rather than Fred is an expert at this or is really good with that or handled this situation really good. I think we should assign him.
Yeah, and it is really driven by the person or the group that's in need. So what do they feel comfortable with? What do they need?
Yeah, very similar. Very self-selection for the person who would like to seek some support because we have the same list on our internal website of all our peer supporters, because you might not want to talk to, especially at a small depot location, the one peer supporter that's there. You might have worked with someone 10 years ago, or see someone who's also a first-year apprentice across the other side of the state, and they'll understand your situation, and that's where you feel comfortable making that first step.
Here's a question for all of the panel members. It comes from Pat, and Pat, thanks for joining us. Hi panel, do you have a PSO support group? So who supports the PSO in an Insta? Because the PSO is helping everybody else, and surely there will be times when the PSO needs a bit of help as well. For example, would a PSO know in themselves when possible burnout is on the cards, or if they're struggling a little bit and they need help?
Well, there are reasons why it's really important to have a good framework of support around your PSOs.
Yeah.
The organisation has a responsibility to make sure that they are okay to continue doing the kind of work that they do too. So for QFES, we have a regular supervision meeting where the PSOs get together as a group, or even if they prefer to have an individual contact, so that their workload is kind of closely managed by a psychologist within their region. And so that's somebody who can kind of keep an eye on how they're going, how they're managing things, give them a bit of guidance and advice around particular cases if they need some help with that, or offer some ongoing training. But they have somebody who kind of oversees them locally.
So
to be able
monitor
to assist with
them
that.
just in case they need
Help
some
out with
help
their
too.
well-being.
Yep.
And PSOs can actually take some time out for the role as well. So if they have got something going on in their personal lives, we have a structure in place that they can take a leave of absence, so they can, concentrate on looking after themselves and not have to sort of take on a burden of, supporting other people as well. So it's, not something that they are obligated to do. They certainly have a choice in the amount of work that they take on too. Yeah.
Here's a question from Kylie. Does your organisation see the importance of peer support programs not only for employees but their families and their loved ones as well? So extend it out a little bit. Might go with the QPS.
A lot of our PSOs will get involved with family members, partners, but we actually have an external support program that family members can access. So we do have it across the spectrum. One of the things that I would really like to see though is setting up a peer support program for our retired police. I think there's a scope for that. Because I think a lot of that happens informally, but I think that there's a real niche market there for us to work on that. So it's something I'd be passionate in approaching.
I would say from our point of view, we're very socially conscious, and whilst all our peer supporters are employees, we know that they take those skills out into their communities and their families, and that's something that we're actually really passionate about. So we have a pretty high density. 1 in 6 of our staff are peer supporters. We have probably that again who would like to go on and do more training, and we're trying to get as many people as possible trained up, although most businesses might look and go, where do you draw the line? Our sort of take at the moment is, well, why should we have to? If they want to be involved and develop their skills, we'd love to help them, their families, their communities, and our workplace.
Claudia has joined us, and she's been on the keyboard and tapped in this question for you guys. Any recommendations for implementing a PSP in a small business, a small organisation? Your organisations are quite large and lots of people, but let's talk about a small-scale operation. Lara, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I think I'm working with a particular department within our health service who are looking at this, so they don't have a big workforce. And one of the challenges is something that's been mentioned here as well, is people not being overutilised. So something that's being looked at across the hospital, in the smaller hospitals, is to look for wellbeing ambassadors. So their role is a little bit more generic and is what is known as a water cooler conversation role, as opposed to the trauma focus, and that resources can be fed to them to distribute and hold events and things like that, where people can get that support. And also that role can then distribute where they can go and get support, be it informally or formally as well. And there's not a lot of costs involved in that, because there's a lot of online resources to support that wellbeing ambassador kind of role. And as long as that person's role is clear as well, I think is super important. So they're not having people coming thinking they're going to get therapy from them as well, because that person is at risk of being burnt out then.
And I'll be leveraging off the likes of the Lifelines, the Beyond Blues, e-mental health prac, a lot of those things, you'll find there are some community programs to allow that training to encourage a peer supporter and upskill them as well, and having a look what they offer to be able to work in a small business. Right?
Yeah. Let's take it to another level. Thanks to Helen's question then, we've looked at the small business scenario. Are there any best practice guidelines regarding peer support programs? Well, we want the best for our people, don't we? All the time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So certainly internally, we have code of conduct and policies and lots of guidelines that actually govern our peer support program. But yeah, certainly there are some broader research and guidelines out there as well. There's some research that was done for, I think, what was then the Australian Centre for Post-Traumatic Mental Health, but now Phoenix Australia. They have got some information there around the best practice for guidelines for peer support programs, particularly in high-risk organisations. And I'm sure that the WorkSafe Queensland website will have lots of resources that would give people advice around that as you're setting up a program too.
I guess the last thing you want to do is get bogged down in red tape, bureaucracy, and over-formalise a process that's working.
Yeah, absolutely. But yet it is still important to make sure that those frameworks
are
in
absolutely.
place,
to assist people but it's a fine line. It's a juggling process, is it not?
Yeah. Getting the balance right.
QPS point of view?
You've got to have some benchmarks and have some specific things to make sure that you're meeting those targets. It really is dependent on having a dedicated coordinator for it so that it doesn't fall over. I think that's one of the main areas that people need to consider, is that it does take that dedication. Otherwise, you won't get that take up and follow up.
And unfortunately, like if a program or an initiative like this is kind of started up and it's perceived to fail, that's really detrimental. It can take years for an organisation to actually re-establish the trust and integrity in their initiatives in future. So I really suggest, spend the time setting the processes up.
Well, let me hold you here, because you've probably touched on Luke, who's going to play devil's advocate here and say, well, what do you do if you receive negative feedback about the program, right? You're talking about it's got to work, it's got to be positive, it's got to be, doing the right job. And he's saying, well, what if somebody comes in and says, oh, that was hopeless?
Yeah, absolutely. I think feedback is really essential to make sure that you are meeting the needs and that you are building the reputation of the program. So it's important to kind of know if there is something that's not working about it. So that actually gives you the opportunity to address some gaps in the services, or maybe introduce some additional training, or certainly if there is a serious breach of confidentiality, well then some actions need to be taken around that. And that's the kind of stuff that actually ensures the positive reputation and that long-term sustainability of your programs, is making sure you've got those things in place.
I actually love negative feedback. I think that's our opportunity to improve. That's how we refine our programs. If we're getting pats on the back all the time, look, that's nice and all, but it doesn't help us make sure that what we're doing is the best it possibly can be. I ask for negative feedback as much as humanly possible, because I think that's our chance to grow.
Lara?
I find this a delicate space. It's very welcome we use formal structures. However, I've started looking to the principles of volunteer management to address this sort of thing, because we're working with volunteers, so there's some fine lines around how it's orchestrated.
You certainly don't want to lose them, do you?
No.
But you don't want them doing a poor job. So
that's exactly right. Yeah, and damaging the reputation of the program. Yep.
All right, well, we're coming to a close for our session today, but just in summing up, if I could ask each one of you for a quick final comment, more along the lines of, do you have a key piece of advice for an agency or an organisation considering considering the introduction of a peer support program? So they're toing and froing, and they're considering it. Let's start from this end.
I'll just reiterate what I said before. I think it needs a dedicated coordinator. So unless you have that, the likelihood it might fall over. So put a lot of time, effort, resourcing to make sure it's done appropriately, and supporting that person or role to be able to make sure that the program is ongoing and people are engaged.
I think there is a lot to consider when you are kind of setting up a peer support program. So I would suggest that I think the key things are very much around getting the right people for the job and making sure that you've got support for them to make sure that they've got the ability to be able to continue doing a good job over a period of time too. So making sure you've got some processes in place to allow them to do it well.
Yeah.
And I'd say reach out to organisations that already have peer support programs in place, because whilst you definitely do impact whatever your peer support focus is, I think you'll probably, if you asked any one of us, there's been a significant cultural change off the back of the peer support programs that isn't often measured but definitely felt within organisations.
So don't hesitate in going to the Lifelines, the Mates in Constructions, and using their expertise.
Yeah, or just other organisations who are making it happen, definitely.
Okay. Yep. Lara?
I think my piece of advice would be embedding your program inside your organisation's strategies and plans, etc., so then it can be sustained, it's got a place to belong, it's regularly reported on, it's valued, it's known. I think that is really important, and it's also helping then to build a culture in the organisation of help seeking, which is extremely important.
Folks, I'm sure you'll agree with me that today has been very informative, and on your behalf I'd like to thank Lara, Aaron, Robin and Trish for sharing their expertise with us today, and I'd also like to thank you for joining us. So thanks guys, really appreciate your help. Yeah. There were some great questions and insights shared by our panel, which I think has given us all lots to think about when either looking to implement or to help with continuously improving our workplace's peer support program. Before we wrap up today's event, here are some key takeaways. Peer support forms a component of an organisation's overall employee support strategy. It is tangible acknowledgement of the value that is placed on employees and the work that they do perform. Peer supporters may be the first point of contact for an employee experiencing distress and have comprehensive knowledge of appropriate resources. Peer support programs require appropriate resourcing. We've heard that a number of times from all four of our panellists, with robust processes, again, that's been stated over and over again, around selection, induction, refresher training, supervision and evaluation. Peer support programs present a wide range of benefits. For example, risk identification, critical incident management, reducing stigma, creating a culture of support, linking employees with appropriate professional services. On the screen you'll see a couple of resources that might be helpful to those interested in establishing a peer support program in their workplace. These include the Mentally Healthy Workplaces Toolkit, available from Workplace Health and Safety Queensland. This toolkit aims to help employers, managers and leaders eliminate and minimise risks to psychological health and create workplace environments that are mentally healthy. You can also find a range of tools and resources on our website that can assist you in identifying and managing work-related mental health hazards, including stress, violence, bullying and fatigue. There's also a guideline development document that Phoenix Australia Centre for Post-Traumatic Mental Health has released. If you or someone you know needs support, please reach out. A range of support services are on the screen, and remember, Lifeline is available 24/7. Today's session concludes our Mental Health Week 2020 virtual events. We hope that you have found these sessions this week valuable and have received guidance and resources to help you create and maintain a mentally healthy workplace. It's been a big week, but we've enjoyed the opportunity to engage with you virtually and have robust conversations about the importance of having positive and supportive workplace culture that promotes mental health. While this is the last virtual event for Mental Health Week, there's still plenty of free virtual events to go for Safe Work Month, which runs right through to the end of October, including sessions on vicarious trauma, wellbeing anchors at work, and a session exploring how fear can impact the return to work process. You can also access a full catalogue of industry and topic-specific video case studies, podcasts, speaker recordings and webinars and films to help you take action to improve your WHS and return to work outcomes. These resources are free to download and share from worksafe.qld.gov.au. Once again, thanks to our panel and thanks to you for supporting Mental Health Week, and I look forward to seeing you at more of our Safe Work Month events. Remember, work safe, home safe.